My parents kicked me out at 16 from my sister's pregnancy, saying, "You're old enough to figure it out." Years later, they showed up demanding to move into my house. I smiled and said something that destroyed their lives forever. What I said was simple. I know about Grandpa's inheritance. The color drained from their faces as they realized their decade-long fraud was about to unravel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain how I went from sleeping in a tent to owning everything they thought was theirs. I always knew I was unwanted, not in the "oops, I was an accident" way, but in the "my parents actually told me they wished they only had one kid" way. My twin sister Emma was everything they ever wanted, and they made sure she knew it. She had her own room with pink curtains and Disney everything, while I got the tiny space with a bed that squeaked and a dresser from the 1970s. Every morning was a reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I'd wake up hearing my parents discussing Emma's gymnastics or new clothes while I figured out my own day. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my unofficial name. At school, parent-teacher conferences meant them gushing over Emma's finger paintings, while my report card sat unexamined. I was busting my ass for grades, thinking maybe academic success would earn their attention. It was pointless. The favoritism was systematic and calculated. Emma got first dibs on everything: food, clothes, attention. Her toys were sacred relics that I couldn't touch without triggering screaming matches. Meanwhile, my wardrobe consisted of hand-me-downs from the cousins I'd never met. Christmas and birthdays followed the same pattern. Emma's gift mountain versus my token one or two items, just enough so they could claim they got me something. The only person who made me feel visible was Grandpa. He treated me like I mattered, taking me fishing and sharing stories about overcoming hardship. Those weekend visits were my lifeline, the only times I felt like a normal kid instead of an unwanted burden. But when he got cancer, even that was taken from me. My parents would take Emma to visit him while I was told to stay home and help around the house. I'd sneak out to see him anyway, and he'd tell me how proud he was of my strength. When Grandpa died, I lost my only advocate. At the funeral, Emma stood at the front with my parents while I was relegated to the back, like they were embarrassed to acknowledge my existence. The message was clear. Even in grief, I didn't belong with the real family. After his death, things got worse. The minimal attention I'd received disappeared completely. I became a ghost in my own home, watching them plan Emma's future while treating my presence like an inconvenience they tolerated. Family photos captured my elbow or the back of my head, if I appeared at all. Then came the bomb that changed everything. At 16, Emma got pregnant by Jake, a 19-year-old high school dropout with no prospects. Instead of consequences or difficult conversations about teenage pregnancy, my parents threw a celebration. They were, so excited to be grandparents, and immediately began planning a shotgun wedding that happened so fast it broke speed records. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mom called me downstairs with that smile I'd learned to dread, the one that meant something terrible was about to happen. She explained that with Emma's baby coming, they needed my room for the nursery. When I asked what I was supposed to do, she shrugged and delivered the words that would haunt me for years. "You're old enough to figure it out." I was 16. Dad stood there with his arms crossed, backing her up with his usual speech about taking responsibility for myself, as if kicking out a teenager was normal parenting. That night, I packed my few belongings, clothes, books, and some mementos from Grandpa, and set up an old tent in the backyard. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Winter hit hard. I'd huddle in that tent with 3 layers of clothing, using a flashlight to do homework while my grades plummeted. Through the kitchen window, I could see them having family dinners, laughing and planning for Emma's baby like I'd never existed. They'd made me invisible even when I was just yards away from their warm house. I survived by doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, anything for a few dollars. Most people looked at me like a beggar, but some gave me work. I was grateful for every dollar, using it to buy food and supplies while pretending this was all temporary. One day, standing outside Frank's bakery, I must have looked desperate enough to catch the owner's attention. Frank was a gruff, no-nonsense guy who saw right through my attempts to play it cool. When he asked if I was looking for work, I didn't hesitate. He needed someone for floors, deliveries, and cleanup. Nothing fancy, but he'd pay cash and throw in day-old bread. Starting at 4 a.m. was brutal, but the moment I walked into that warm bakery, I knew I could do this. Frank wasn't warm and fuzzy, but he was fair. Over time, He shared stories about his own father kicking him out for being a screw-up, and how he'd built the bakery from nothing. He saw something in me that my own family never had. After a few weeks, Frank offered me a small room above the bakery. It was basically storage space with a single bed and a tiny window, but it was warm and it was mine. That night, I had the best sleep I'd had in months. Frank even gave me keys to the place eventually. A gesture of trust that meant everything to someone who'd been treated as untrustworthy his entire life. Working at the bakery became my foundation. I learned to knead dough, make bread, and create pastries while Frank taught me about budgeting and planning for the future. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I picked up additional work at a convenience store and did weekend landscaping. Every penny went into savings as I planned my escape from that small town and the family that had discarded me. The work was exhausting, but it gave me something my family never had: purpose and self-respect. I wasn't the unwanted twin anymore. I was someone building a future through determination and hard work. Frank's motto became my mantra. You either let life beat you, or you get up and beat it right back. What my family didn't know was that I'd inherited more than just Grandpa's wisdom. While I was grinding through those early years, I was also developing skills they'd never expected. The bakery taught me business operations and customer service. The convenience store showed me retail management and inventory control. The landscaping work built my understanding of project management and client relations. By 18, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I'd earned my GED while working full-time and had started taking business courses at the community college. Frank had begun letting me handle vendor negotiations and supply orders, teaching me about contracts and pricing strategies. I was learning the fundamentals of running a successful business while my parents assumed I was just scraping by. More importantly, I was building a network. Frank introduced me to other local business owners who became mentors and eventually clients. The bakery's accountant, Lisa, taught me about financial planning and investment strategies. The lawyer who handled Frank's contracts, Robert, explained business law and legal protections. These weren't just jobs anymore. They were my business education. My parents had no idea that their discarded son was developing expertise in operations, finance, and legal matters. They thought I was just the family failure who'd been kicked out and forgotten. That misconception would prove to be their biggest mistake. By 21, I'd saved enough money to leave town and start my own business. I used everything Frank had taught me about operations, combined with the financial planning Lisa had shown me, to open a small consulting firm, helping local businesses improve their efficiency and profitability. The network I'd built through years of odd jobs became my first client base. The business grew faster than I'd imagined. My experience working in different industries gave me insights that expensive consultants from big cities couldn't match. I understood the real challenges small businesses faced because I'd lived them. Within 2 years, I was grossing 6 figures annually and had hired 3 employees. But success brought an unexpected challenge. Word travels fast in small towns, and eventually, news of my business reached my family. That's when the phone calls started, not to congratulate me or express interest in my life, but to position themselves for whatever benefits my success might offer them. The first call came from Mom, her voice sweet with fake concern. She'd heard I was doing well and wanted to reconnect as a family. No apology for kicking me out, no acknowledgement of the years they had ignored me, just a transparent attempt to rebuild a relationship they had never actually had. I kept the conversation short and non-committal. Emma called next, her approach more direct. She'd heard about my business and thought it was so cool that her twin brother was an entrepreneur. She mentioned that Jake's construction company was struggling and could probably use some business consulting. The implication was clear. Family should help family now that I had something they wanted. I found their sudden interest in my life both predictable and pathetic. For years, they'd treated me as an inconvenience to be managed or ignored. Now that I had money and success, I was suddenly worth their attention. But I wasn't the desperate kid they'd kicked out anymore. I was a business owner with resources, connections, and most importantly, leverage. When Dad finally called, his approach was typically authoritarian. He didn't ask about my life or express any genuine interest in reconnecting. Instead, he launched into a speech about family obligations and how successful people should help their relatives get ahead. He suggested I could invest in Jake's business or maybe hire Emma for my company. The entitlement was staggering. I listened to his demands with the patience I'd learned from years of difficult client negotiations. When he finished, I simply said, "I'll consider it," and ended the call. What I was actually considering wasn't how to help them. It was how to protect myself from whatever scheme they were planning. My instincts proved correct. Over the next few months, they ramped up their outreach campaign. Family friends started mentioning how proud my parents were of my success. Distant relatives began friend requesting me on social media. Emma posted throwback photos of us as kids with captions about missing my twin brother and how family is everything. The manipulation was textbook. Create social pressure, establish a narrative of reconciliation, then move in for the ask. I'd seen similar tactics from difficult clients trying to negotiate better terms or vendors attempting to secure contracts they didn't deserve. But this was personal, and the stakes were higher than any business deal. That's when I made a strategic decision that would change everything. Instead of reacting emotionally or trying to avoid them, I decided to gather intelligence. I hired a private investigator to research my family's current financial situation. If they were circling around my success, I wanted to know why. The investigator's report revealed information that changed my entire understanding of my family dynamics. Emma and Jake were drowning in debt from failed business ventures and lifestyle spending they couldn't afford. My parents had remortgaged their house twice to bail out Emma's family, and were now facing potential foreclosure. Their sudden interest in me wasn't just opportunistic, it was desperate. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. While researching property records and financial documents, the investigator uncovered something that made my blood boil. When Grandpa died, he'd left a substantial inheritance, not to my parents, but specifically to me. The will clearly stated that I was to receive $150,000 when I turned 18, along with some valuable family property. I'd never received that inheritance. According to the documents, my parents had somehow gained control of the estate through legal maneuvering and had spent the money over the years. They had used my inheritance to pay for Emma's wedding, Jake's failed business ventures, and their own lifestyle expenses. While I was sleeping in a tent and working multiple jobs just to survive, they were spending money that legally belonged to me. The betrayal was complete. They hadn't just kicked me out and ignored me, they'd stolen my inheritance and used it to fund the golden child they'd chosen over me. Every dollar they'd spent on Emma's comfort and opportunities had literally been taken from my future. I sat in my office, staring at the documentation, while rage and grief battled in my chest. The private investigator had found bank records, legal filings, and correspondence that painted a clear picture of fraud and theft. My parents had betrayed not just my trust, but the explicit wishes of the grandfather who'd been my only ally. But alongside the emotional devastation, my business mind was analyzing the situation strategically. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It was about recovering stolen assets and ensuring justice was served. More importantly, it was about using the leverage this information provided to protect myself from their ongoing manipulation. I called Robert, the lawyer who had become both a mentor and friend over the years. When I explained the situation and shared the investigator's findings, his response was immediate and decisive. "This is actionable fraud. We can not only recover your inheritance with interest, but we can pursue additional damages for the years of loss you've suffered." Robert's confidence gave me clarity about the path forward. I wasn't going to confront my family emotionally or make demands based on hurt feelings. I was going to approach this like the business problem it had become, systematically, legally, and with overwhelming documentary evidence. The timing was perfect. My consulting firm was now generating over $200,000 annually. I'd built a strong professional network, and I had the resources to pursue extended legal action if necessary. Most importantly, I had documentation of their financial desperation and their recent attempts to manipulate me back into their lives. Robert and I spent the next 2 weeks developing a comprehensive legal strategy. We would file suit to recover the inheritance with accumulated interest and damages, seek an injunction against any further contact or harassment, and potentially pursue criminal fraud charges depending on what additional evidence we uncovered during discovery. But before we filed anything, I decided to make a strategic business decision. If my family wanted to reconnect so badly, I'd give them exactly what they thought they wanted: a meeting to discuss family business. What they didn't know was that this meeting would be their reckoning, not their rescue. I called my parents and suggested we meet at my house to discuss how we could help each other going forward. The eagerness in Mom's voice was almost pathetic. She immediately began coordinating with Emma and Jake, assuming this was their big opportunity to cash in on my success. Over the next week, I prepared for that meeting like I would for any major business presentation. I had Robert on standby with all the legal documents ready to file. I arranged for backup documentation to be stored securely off-site. Most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for what was about to happen. 3 years after building my consulting business, I'd saved enough to buy my first house, a modest 3-bedroom place on the edge of town, but it was mine. Walking through those doors with my own keys felt like the ultimate validation of everything I'd worked for. No one could kick me out. No one could take it away. Or so I thought. I spent weeks furnishing the place gradually. A couch from a thrift store, a dining table, basic necessities as I could afford them. It wasn't luxurious, but every piece represented progress and independence. For the first time in my life, I had a space that truly belonged to me. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, when I was just starting to feel settled, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, it felt like a punch to the gut. My parents, Emma, Jake, and their 3 kids were standing on my porch, smiling like nothing had happened, like they hadn't kicked me out and ignored me for years. "Surprise!" Mom announced, as if this was some heartwarming reunion. "We heard you bought a house. We're so proud of you." I gripped the doorknob, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Part of me wanted to slam the door, but I was also genuinely shocked. After years of silence, here they were, acting like everything was fine. Emma pushed forward with her youngest on her hip, looking around my entryway like she was appraising real estate. "Nice place, bro. You've really done well for yourself." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a social visit. My family only showed up when they needed something. Dad cleared his throat, putting on his authoritative voice. "Son, we were thinking, with Emma's family growing and you having this big house to yourself, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Family should stick together, right?" I almost laughed. Family? These people had thrown me out like trash as a teenager, and now they were talking about family obligations. "What are you really asking for?" I managed to say. Mom stepped forward, all smiles and manipulation. "Well, we thought, wouldn't it be nice if we all moved in here? One big happy family, like old times." She said it so casually, like she wasn't asking me to give up the one thing I'd worked so hard for. The memories flooded back, sleeping in that tent, working multiple jobs, building everything from nothing while they lived comfortably off money that was supposed to be mine. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not happening." Their smiles dropped. Mom's face twisted in confusion, like she couldn't believe I was refusing them. "But we're family," she insisted. "We should be helping each other out." I felt my hands start to shake, but not from fear this time, from controlled anger. "Where was that attitude when I was 16 and sleeping in a tent in your backyard?" For a moment, they were silent. Dad's face turned red, his chest puffing up in that bullying posture I remembered from childhood. "Now listen here." "No, you listen," I cut him off. "I built this place on my own, without any help from you. I worked every day to get where I am, and I'm not letting you walk in here like nothing happened. This is my home, and you're not welcome here." Emma's face contorted into fake hurt. "Come on, don't be selfish. We need the space, and you owe us." That was the final straw. "I owe you?" I snapped. "You kicked me out when I was a kid, left me with nothing, and now you think you can just show up and take over?" I took a deep breath, remembering the documentation sitting in my office safe, the legal strategy Robert and I had developed, and the nuclear option I'd been preparing for months. "Get out," I said firmly. "And don't come back." They stood there for a few more seconds, staring at me like they couldn't process what they were hearing. Finally, they turned and left, getting into their car without another word. I watched them drive away feeling a mixture of anger, relief, and satisfaction. I'd finally stood up for myself, but I knew this wasn't over. Toxic people don't just disappear when you tell them no. They escalate. 2 weeks later, my prediction proved accurate. A legal notice arrived in my mailbox. Emma was trying to contest my ownership of the house, claiming it should be shared as family property. The audacity was staggering, but it was also exactly what I'd been hoping for. I called Robert immediately. "They took the bait," I said. "Time to end this." "They don't have a leg to stand on regarding your house," Robert confirmed. "But they'll try to make it expensive and stressful for you. However, this gives us the perfect opening to file our counterclaim regarding your grandfather's inheritance." Over the next few weeks, they launched a full campaign to paint me as the ungrateful son who'd stolen from his struggling family. They claimed I'd taken money from them to buy the house, that I was selfishly hoarding resources while my sister's children suffered. Old family friends started calling, asking why I couldn't just let my family in. But I wasn't that desperate kid anymore. I had resources, documentation, and most importantly, a strategic plan. Robert filed our countersuit with devastating precision. We demanded recovery of my grandfather's inheritance with accumulated interest and damages, totaling over $300,000. We included documentation of their fraud, evidence of their recent manipulation attempts, and demanded an injunction against further harassment. The response was immediate. My phone exploded with calls from Mom, Dad, and Emma, all leaving voicemails about wanting to talk this through and work things out as a family. They wanted to talk now that they were facing real consequences. I didn't respond. Instead, Robert and I prepared for depositions and discovery. We subpoenaed their financial records, which revealed the full extent of their fraud and current desperation. They'd not only stolen my inheritance, but had spent it so recklessly that they were facing bankruptcy. The legal proceedings were brutal for them, but satisfying for me. Every time they tried to portray themselves as victims, Robert would produce another document showing how they'd systematically excluded me from family benefits while using my money to fund Emma's lifestyle. Bank records showed they'd used my inheritance for Emma's wedding, Jake's failed business ventures, a family vacation to Disney World, and countless other expenses that benefited everyone except me. While I was sleeping in a tent and working multiple jobs, they were living off money that legally belonged to me. The most damning evidence came from their own financial records. They'd remortgaged their house twice to continue bailing out Emma and Jake's failed ventures. Their current debt exceeded $180,000, and they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. Their lawsuit against me wasn't just opportunistic. It was their only hope of avoiding foreclosure. When the judge reviewed all the evidence, the verdict was swift and comprehensive. Not only did I win regarding my house ownership, but they were ordered to pay back my inheritance with interest and damages. The total judgment was $347,000, money they didn't have and couldn't possibly repay. The look on their faces when the judgment was read was something I'll never forget. For the first time in my life, they couldn't manipulate, guilt trip, or abuse their way out of consequences. They were caught, exposed, and facing financial ruin. But the legal victory was just the beginning of their problems. Word of the fraud case spread through our small town, destroying their reputation in the community, where image meant everything to them. Dad lost his job when his employer learned about the judgment. Mom's social circle quietly distanced themselves from the family, caught stealing from their own son. Emma and Jake's situation became desperate. With no more bailouts from my parents and mounting debts from their failing business ventures, they lost their house and had to move in with Jake's mother. The lifestyle they'd maintained through my stolen inheritance was gone forever. My parents' house went into foreclosure, despite their desperate attempts to negotiate payment plans they couldn't afford. They approached me through intermediaries, offering to settle this family matter privately, but Robert advised against any negotiations. Legal judgments don't disappear just because the debtors are family. The financial consequences were severe, but the social consequences were equally devastating. In a small town, reputation matters, and everyone now knew they'd stolen from their own son and kicked him out as a teenager. Former friends avoided them at grocery stores. Church members whispered behind their backs. Their carefully constructed image as respectable family people was destroyed. 6 months after the judgment, I received a call from a bankruptcy attorney representing my parents. They'd filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, listing me as their primary creditor. Even in bankruptcy, they'd still owe me a significant portion of the judgment, but more importantly, the public record of their fraud would follow them forever. Emma made one last attempt at reconciliation. showing up at my office with tears and a sob story about her children suffering because of the family conflict. She begged me to show mercy and drop the judgment, for the kids' sake. I listened politely, then explained that her children were suffering because of choices she and her parents had made, not because of consequences I'd imposed. The transformation was complete. The family that had kicked me out for being inconvenient was now facing financial ruin because they'd underestimated the kid they'd thrown away. They'd spent my inheritance assuming I'd never discover their theft or have the resources to fight back. They were wrong on both counts. A year after the judgment, I expanded my consulting business into a second office, hired 8 employees, and was grossing over $400,000 annually. The money from the legal victory helped, but more importantly, the vindication gave me confidence to pursue bigger opportunities without the psychological weight of family disapproval. My parents ended up moving to a different state, unable to face the daily reminders of their disgrace in our hometown. Emma and Jake's marriage didn't survive the financial stress, and she now works retail while living with her mother. Dad found occasional construction work, but his age and health problems limit his earning potential. They destroyed their own lives through greed, favoritism, and the assumption that family connections could substitute for basic decency. The kid they'd thrown away became successful, despite their neglect, while the golden child they'd invested everything in couldn't maintain the lifestyle they'd funded through theft. Today, I own 3 properties, employ 12 people, and my business generates over $500,000 annually. I've built relationships with people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. Most importantly, I've learned that real family isn't about blood. It's about people who show up when you need them and celebrate your success without expecting anything in return. The best revenge isn't just living well. It's building something so successful that the people who discarded you have to watch from a distance, knowing they threw away their only chance to be part of something meaningful. My parents taught me that family is conditional, but they also taught me that I'm stronger than they ever imagined. That's a lesson worth every dollar it cost them to learn.